So you do think he was a real person?
Most of the scholars I've talked to say he probably was. The evidence is not great, of course, but I think I don't think it's that big a deal, actually, because he...
And we are live. Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I'm Vince Revo, host of Man After God, and Joe Rogan was asking this question: was Jesus a real person? And whoever he was interviewing actually answered that yes, most scholars agree that Jesus was a real person. And then he says the evidence is not great. And then he says it's not really a big deal. Well, I'm here to really answer that question and to also talk about why it is a big deal. It is extremely important. And the evidence, in fact, is great. The fact is, yes, Jesus of Nazareth, often referred to as Jesus Christ or Jesus the Messiah, is widely accepted among historians and scholars as a real historical figure. If the evidence was not great, then collectively, scholars and historians would agree to say, no, he probably didn't exist. However, they don't. And I'm going to give you 5 pieces of evidence. In fact, I will give you a bonus one at the end as well, of the evidence for the historic Jesus Christ as a real historical figure. And right now, we're going to start it off with 4 people that most scholars believe are also real people that don't have nearly as much evidence, not even close to the evidence that Jesus has of being a real person. And the first one I'm going to start off with, I don't think anybody would argue that this person is not a real person and some make-believe fictional character, and that is Socrates, believed to have lived in 4 to 399 BCE. Most of what we know about Socrates comes from the writings of, guess who? His students, his disciples, primarily one being Plato. And unlike Jesus, there are actually no contemporary accounts of Socrates' life or teachings. It's coming through 2 of his students, mainly Plato. Yet, despite that, I'm sure this person there being interviewed by Joe Rogan would accept that Socrates is a historical, real figure. And that brings us to number 2, Homer, living around the 8th century BCE. Traditionally, he's been ascribed as the author of the ancient Greek epic poems such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the existence and identity of Homer have been pretty much a subject of huge debate over the years, with some believing that he might have been a conglomerate of multiple poets or a legend, much like King Arthur. However, to this day, if you go into the colleges and universities and you study Greek literature and Greek history, he's often referenced as a single historical figure. Yet there's very little evidence compared to Jesus Christ that he was a real person. Yet we all believe that, yeah, Homer was a real person. Now, I'll give you one in the early after death of Jesus Christ, and that is King Arthur. So King Arthur was apparently a legendary British leader, ruler, soldier, and according to medieval historians and romances, he led the defenses of Britain against the Saxon invaders. And while there are some references of King Arthur in the early sources, the Holy Grail, there's really no solid archaeological evidence for his existence. Yet he remains a figure in Western literature and thought, and people generally believe that he existed, that he was a real person. Then let's go even earlier to the 12th to the 17th century. There's Prester John. He was a legendary Christian ruler and a priest king said to rule over a distant eastern land. And European chronicles and letters refer to Prester John, but upon looking at it historically, some people are wondering, was there even such a kingdom, or was this just made up? Nonetheless, he was believed extensively and influenced a lot of European thought and explorations for centuries. Yet, unlike Jesus Christ, real no significance evidence for him. For Jesus, in contrast, we have several non-Christian sources from the 1st and early 2nd centuries that reference him. These are non-Christian, they've got no skin in the game, and this includes historians like Tacitus and Josephus, and there's also the New Testament itself, which While yes, we would say it's religious in nature, it's basically a documentation of the life of Jesus Christ. And the earliest manuscripts are so close to the events that it's impossible to deny its historic accuracy. In fact, there are few historians in the world today that will say Jesus Christ is not a real historical figure. There may be debates on his teachings or the details in his life, but historically, across the board, you will be hard-pressed to find a scholar or historian, serious historian, deny the personhood of Jesus Christ. And that's because, number one, the Gospels are a historic document. The New Testament contains 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And all of these provide accounts of Jesus' life, teaching, death, and resurrection. For example, Luke 1:1-4 states, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were," get this, "eyewitnesses and servants of the word." So we're talking eyewitnesses here. Even in the court of law, eyewitnesses coming together form, in this modern day, very strong evidence for the truth. And that brings us to number 2, the letters of Paul. So the Apostle Paul's letters, which were many, and in fact, in many cases predate the Gospels, affirm the existence of Jesus Christ and describe his impact on the early church, the early followers. Paul even has personally met James, the brother of Jesus, and Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3-8, where Paul recounts the tradition he received concerning Jesus' death and resurrection, and he also lists, again, eyewitnesses, says this, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins, that he was raised on the 3rd day, and that he appeared to Cephas and to the 12. Again, more eyewitness accounts. But forget about the Gospels for a second. Forget about the Apostle Paul for a second. And let's go to number 3, and that is non-sources. So we talked about Josephus and Tacitus. They wrote about Jesus. Josephus, writing Antiquities of the Jews, talks about Jesus. And Tacitus refers to the crucifixion of Jesus. In fact, as we're gathering more archaeological evidence, the evidence for Jesus Christ is coming up more and more. And as we're gathering external evidence outside of Christendom, outside of believers, things are being more and more consistent to what was described in the Gospels and in the book of Acts as well. Which brings us to number 4, the early church movement, the early Christian communities that rose up after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. There was this massive, rapid growth in Christian communities, and that in itself is evidence of the existence of Jesus Christ. Because who are all of these people following all of a sudden? So these communities spread across the Roman Empire, and during that time they faced tough persecution, all of which were also documented in the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles. Which brings us into number 5, the martyrdom of the disciples, especially the early church. Many of Jesus' disciples and early followers were willing to face persecution and death for their belief in him. They could have denied him. They could have said, yeah, he doesn't exist. Yeah, he's not the Son of God, but they didn't. They were willing to die for that truth. The fact that somebody is willing to die for something suggests that they genuinely believe in the historical and divine nature of Jesus Christ. Otherwise, if they didn't believe he was God, they would just deny him and then be able to live. Like, who wouldn't want to preserve their life just by uttering a few words of denial? In fact, in 2 Timothy 4, verse 6-8, Paul anticipates his impending martyrdom. He knows that he's going to die. He knows that he's going to be killed for his belief in Jesus Christ. "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come." This is Paul saying, basically, they're going to take me. Basically, he knew that this is my time. I'm going to be martyred for this Jesus. Now, I'm going to give you 2 more bonus reasons why the historic Jesus Christ absolutely, undeniably existed. So there's this thing called the Shroud of Turin. There's scientists, rocket scientists, expert photographers, PhDs, doctors who've studied the shroud, and they cannot figure out how this giant X-ray, the size of that backdrop there, even larger, somehow has gotten imprinted on this piece of cloth, on this shroud, about 2,000 years old. The amount of power necessary to generate that much power would be about 100 Tesla Model X's. It is a huge amount of power to literally imprint what you can see on the shroud, the evidence from the blood through the crown of thorns to where he was pierced to not a bone being broken. You see so much evidence that, hey, this may actually be the shroud of Jesus. This is the shroud that he was wrapped in when he died. And this burst of light might have been when he was resurrected, because there's no way you'd be able to power this giant X-ray, this giant laser print on this cloth with such accuracy that it actually looks like a 3D print. And again, this has been studied by hundreds of people, rocket scientists, doctors. They cannot figure out why there is no pigment on it and how this was possible. That's why it's one of these ancient relics that remains a mystery. But for those of us that know the one true God, Jesus Christ, we know how that happened. It was Jesus coming back to life. It was the resurrection that after 3 days, he came back to life and he rose again, because he is alive today. He is with us. He is bringing us into the light. He has transformational power. He has saving grace. And that's why billions of people around the world believe that, yes, Jesus Christ is in fact a real person. The last one I want to talk about is the Old Testament prophecies. There are approximately 351 Old Testament prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. For one person to fulfill 8 of those prophecies, the odds of that would be 1 in 100 quadrillion. Now, the odds of getting hit by lightning are 1 in 1 million. The odds of winning a super lottery jackpot are 1 in 300 million. The odds that one person fulfills 8 of those prophecies is 1 in 100 quadrillion. The odds that one person fulfills 351 of those prophecies, which Jesus did fulfill, is 1 to 10 to the power of 50. That is 10 with 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 50 times. I don't even know what that number is. It is too big to even imagine the odds of that. Yet somehow, Jesus did. Why? Because with man, it is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. So the truth is, there is no question that Jesus was a real person. The only question is, who is Jesus to you? Because Jesus said that he is I am, equating himself to God. He said that he is the way to the Father. In fact, he is the only way to the Father, and that he has come to give you life by believing in him, by grace, through faith in him, believing who he was and who he is and who he will always be. He is God. And that's my challenge to you, friends, is that if you don't believe that Jesus is God right now, you may not believe in him, but he believes in you. He loves you, and he wants a personal, intimate relationship with you. And he wants to bring you from darkness to light. He wants you to go from sorrow to joy, from victimhood to victory. He wants to turn your test into a testimony and your mess into a message. And that is the message that I have for you today. This is Vince Revo, host here at Man After God. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please leave a comment down below. Let us know your thoughts and share this with somebody that you love. Until next time, we'll see you again. God bless, and keep Jesus first.